Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. If this is your first time, let me give you a quick rundown on what we're all about. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we build fun and inexpensive focused commander decks. A focused commander deck is more tuned than a casual deck, but not quite to the level of a competitive or optimized deck. Today's episode is going to be a special one though, where we exclude the cost of the commander. With just a $25 budget, it's pretty much impossible to build around some commanders unless we do so. Sometimes you get lucky and open up a commander in a pack, or you could just trade for them if you really want to build around them. So our budget is still going to be $25, but again, that's $25 for just 99 cards because we're excluding the cost of that commander. And prices on this show are powered by our sponsor, TCGPLAYER. Before we get started today though, make sure you go check out our new classic pink playmat and Commander's Quarters t-shirts on thecommandersquarters.com. And thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Also, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and click that little bell notification icon so that you can stay up to date on the latest Commander's Quarters episodes. Today's commander is Feather the Redeemed. Feather is a 3/4 angel with flying that costs red, white, white. She has, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature you control, exile that card instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. If you do, return to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. This is a very unique ability and really the first time that we've ever seen a Boros commander provide true card advantage. Being able to cast a card and know that we're going to get it back is huge. Now you can build around Feather in a lot of different ways. You can build her with a go wide strategy since her ability allows you to target any creature you control. But personally I found that the most effective build path was a Voltron style strategy. So what's our strategy with this deck? Well, we're going to get Feather out quickly and then target her with everything we've got. We're going to be running a wide variety of cheap targeting spells with this deck, including ones that pump her, protect her, and do other things as well. And then how do we win with this deck? Well, we're going to take out each opponent with lethal commander damage. Kills with Feather can come out of nowhere, and we can kill an opponent as early as turn 4. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to break this deck down into 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how you're going to win with it. So let's go into our first tactic, which is tactic number 1, Flint and Feathers. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for basic land to put it onto the battlefield tapped. Next up, there's Renegade Map, which enters the battlefield tapped, and we can tap and sacrifice it to get a basic land from our library and put it into our hand. Traveler's Amulet and Wanderer's Twig are very similar, we just have to pay 1 and sacrifice them to do so. Although these cards don't ramp us, they do help us fix our mana, which is crucial if we want to get Feather out early. Next up is Marble Diamond, which enters the battlefield tapped and is going to tap for a white. And then there's Pillar of Origins, which can tap for either of our colors, but we can only use it to cast Feather. Feather does have a very restrictive mana cost, and we need every single budget option that we can have to help us out in casting her. Next up, we've got some more straightforward mana rocks with Prismatic Lens, Sphere of the Suns, and Boros Signet. Prismatic Lens can either tap for a colorless or can help us filter our mana. Sphere of the Suns enters the battlefield tapped, and we can tap it 3 times for any color. And then by paying 1 into Boros Signet, we can tap it for both of our colors. Again, this deck 100% revolves around our commander. Since our cost is very restrictive, we need to make sure that we're using the right pieces of ramp and fixing to make sure that we can get her out early. But after we get her out, what are some ways that we can abuse her ability? Let's go through some now in tactic number 2, Drawing Conclusions. First up, we've got 3 spells that each cost a red and are going to draw us a card and they target Feather. Ryle is going to deal 1 damage to her, and Renegade Tactics makes it so that she can't block. Now, neither of these effects actually matter to us, the main thing is that they draw us a card. And since they target Feather, we're going to get these cards back at the end of the turn. Expedite is a much more effective version of this for 2 reasons. First off, it's going to give Feather haste, which can come in handy. Also, since it's an instant, it means that we can use it multiple times and don't have to wait till our next turn. Next up, we've got another spell that cantrips with Panic. Basically, you can only cast it during combat before blockers are declared, and it makes it so the target creature can't block this turn. And then you get to draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So there are some things that you have to keep in mind when you're casting this, but again, it's just another great way to cantrip. We're also going to be running some white cantrips with Niveus Wisps, Bandage, and Defiant Strike. Niveus Wisp is going to make a creature white and tap it. Bandage is going to prevent the next 1 damage that would be dealt to target creature or player. And Defiant Strike is going to give target creature +1/+0 until end of turn. Outside of drawing a card, none of these are particularly useful, but again, the most important thing is that we're getting card advantage with these. The same applies with a card Heal, which is very similar to Bandage. It does the exact same thing, except we're going to get to draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep instead of right away. And finally, we've got 2 cantrips that cost 2 mana with Accelerate and Stun. Accelerate is going to give haste, and Stun makes it so the target creature can't block. Outside of drawing a card like Stun might be seen as useless early on, but later in the game it can come in huge. If we need to finish an opponent off and they only have 1 blocker, we can just use this to get her through. Early on in the game though, we're just going to target Feather with it to draw some cards. The more times that we can cast these cards, the more cards that we're going to draw, and we're going to dig into the right cards that we need. So what are some of those cards that we want to draw into? Let's go through them now in tactic number 3, Unlimited Power. First up, we've got Samut Sprint, which says target creature gets +2/+1 and gains haste until end of turn, scry 1. And then Titan Strength is very similar, it gives +3/+1 and it's also going to scry 1. Both of these are fantastic cards in this deck because they not only pump Feather, but they also provide us with card selection. You'll notice that a lot of spells in this deck have a very low converted mana cost. Because the cheaper our spells are to cast, the more that we can actually cast in a turn. And because of Feather's ability, we don't have to worry about wasting all of our resources in one go. Next up, we're running Fever Charm, which can be flexible depending on our situation. We can either give Feather haste, or we can give her +2/+0 until end of turn. And next up, we've got Seething Anger, Borrowed Hostility, and Reckless Charge, each of which for a red are going to give Feather +3/+0 until end of turn. On top of that, Reckless Charge is going to give her haste, and we can flash it back if we need to. And Borrowed Hostility can actually give her First Strike if we really want to, but most of the time it's going to be that +3/+0. And then we've got two of our best pump spells with Brute Force and Built to Smash that are each going to give her +3/+3. Built to Smash though only works when she's attacking, but that's not a problem with our Voltron style strategy. Next up, there's Fist of the Anvil, which is going to give her +4/+0 until end of turn. And finally, there's Invigorated Rampage, which does the exact same thing, but it's also going to give her Trample. Again, it's important for this deck to efficiently and quickly pump up Feather's power. So the lower the cost of the spell and the more power that we can get, the better. But let's go through some ways to make these spells even more impactful. So it's time to go on to tactic number 4, doubling down. First up, there's Assault Strobe, which might be the most efficient pump spell in this deck. For just a red mana, it's going to give Feather Double Strike. Without any effects, Feather hits for 3, and with Double Strike it's 6. Double Strike essentially makes all of our pump spells doubly effective. With just a few pump spells, we can easily get Feather's power to 11 or more. And then with Double Strike, it's just a one-hit KO. So we're going to be running some more spells that give her Double Strike with Double Cleave and Tamir Battle Rage. If Feather also has power 4 or greater, Tamir Battle Rage is also going to give her Trample. Psychotic Fury is even better in this deck because it's not only going to give her Double Strike, but it's also going to draw us a card. And finally, there's Boros Charm, which is a very powerful and flexible card. With this deck, we're either going to use it to give all of our permanents indestructible, or we're going to give Feather Double Strike until end of turn. Protecting Feather and pumping her are the two most important things that we can do with this deck. But we also need to make sure that we're staying alive too. So let's go through some ways to help us with that in tactic number 5, Life is Good. First up, there's Moment of Triumph, which is going to give Feather +2/+2 and we gain 2 life. Not only does this pump Feather, but it also gains us a little bit of life, which can really add up. But then we've got some ways to gain a ton of life at once with Mortal's Ardor and Swift Justice. Mortal's Ardor gives +1/+1 in lifelink until end of turn. And Swift Justice gives +1/+0 First Strike and lifelink. We dish out a ton of damage with Feather, and we can use these cards to gain a ton of life from that. Finally, there's Moment of Heroism, which is going to give +2/+2 in lifelink until end of turn. As I mentioned before, ideally we want our spells to cost 1 mana, but this card can still come in handy. So we've talked about protecting ourselves by bumping up our life total, but what about protecting Feather? Let's go through some ways now in tactic number 6, Protection Selection. First up, we're going to be running Swiftfoot Boots, which is the only equipment that we're going to be running in this deck. It's going to give Feather Hexproof and Haste. This is a very efficient piece of equipment that does 2 of the things that we want to do for our commander. So even though it's not an instant or a sorcery, we're willing to make an exception. Next up, we've got Stave Off, Blessed Breath, and Emerge Unscathed, each of which do the exact same thing. They cost a white, and they're going to give Feather protection from the color of our choice until end of turn. We can either use this effect to protect Feather, or we can also use it to help her get through. Now, Emerge Unscathed does have Rebound, and we can either choose to make it Rebound, or we can choose to exile it normally with Feather's ability. And then there's God's Willing, which does the exact same thing, but it also lets us scry 1. So not only does this protect Feather, but it also gives us card selection. Next up, we've got Apostle's Blessing and Feet of Resistance, each of which gives her protection for 2 mana. Apostle's Blessing we can actually cast for just 1 if we pay 2 life. And Feet of Resistance gives her a +1/+1 counter on top of the protection. And finally, there's Shelter, which is going to give her protection, and it's going to draw us a card. Now, protection is great because it can be very flexible, but it's not always going to keep Feather alive. So let's go through some more ways to make sure that she stays on the board in tactic number 7, Come Again Soon. First up, there's Cloud Chip, which is going to exile Feather and then bring her right back to the battlefield. Now, this is a great way to protect her in some ways, but it's not going to save her from a board wipe. So we're also going to be running a card like Liberate, which is going to exile her and then bring her back at the end of the turn. It does cost 1 more, but it's often worth the effect just to make sure that we can get around board wipes. And then we've got some similar effects that also have a little more upside with Long Road Home and Otherworldly Journey. Not only do they exile her and bring her back at the end of the turn, but they also are going to bring her back with a +1/+1 counter on her. That counter might not seem like a lot, but every little bit helps when it comes to pumping Feather. But there are also ways to get around board wipes without actually making Feather leave play. So let's go through them now in tactic number 8, Stick Around. First up, there's Death Ward, which we can use to regenerate Feather. For 1 more mana, Dawn Charm does the exact same thing, but it's also slightly more flexible. We can also use it to either fog, or we can counter target spell that targets us. Just keep in mind that the only time that we get it back is when we use it to regenerate Feather. Now, regeneration may be good, but indestructibility is even better. So we're going to be running a Johnny's Presence, which gives Feather indestructible and +1/+1 until end of turn. Now, this is a fantastic card, but in my opinion, it's still not as good as the Golden Pig of the deck. The Golden Pig of our deck is going to be the number 1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Sheltering Light. It's an instant for a white that says target creature gains indestructible until end of turn, scry 1. This may be an extremely simple spell, but it brings an incredible amount of value to this deck. Indestructibility comes in huge for protecting our commander. It protects Feather from many forms of targeted removal and from most board wipes too. On top of that, it lets us scry 1, which isn't card advantage, but it is card selection. So it can help us get rid of any dead cards off the top of our library and help us dig for those cards that we need. And all of this for just 1 mana at instant speed is an incredible value. And that's what makes Sheltering Light the Golden Pig of the deck. But we still have 2 other ways to give Feather indestructible with Valorous Stance and Adamant Will. With Valorous Stance, we can choose to either give her indestructible or to destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater. And on top of giving her indestructible, Adamant Will also gives her +2/+2 until end of turn. Even though both of these do cost 1 more mana, they provide additional value to make up for that. Now we've talked a lot about protecting our board, but what about disrupting our opponents? So let's see some ways that we can do that in tactic number 9, No More Toys. First up, there's Wear and Tear, which is a fuse card, so we can either cast one or both halves. It allows us to destroy an artifact or an enchantment or both. This is just a very flexible card that allows us to use our mana very efficiently. Next up, there's Orum's Thunder, which says destroy target artifact or enchantment. If this spell was kicked, it deals damage equal to that permanent's converted mana cost to target creature. So in most decks, we wouldn't use this to target our own creature, but this deck is different. As long as Feather can take the hit and survive, we're going to kick it and target her. This way we can get it back and use it multiple times. And finally, there's Oblation, which says the owner of target non-land permanent shuffles it into their library, then draws 2 cards. Now, normally we're going to use this on our opponent's permanents, but we can also use it on Feather if she's going to die anyways. So even though we are already going to lose our commander, we get to draw 2 cards. But we're not quite done with our removal in this deck just yet. So let's go into our final tactic. Tactic number 10, Feather Duster. First up, there's Impact Resonance, which is going to deal X damage as we choose among any number of target creatures where X is the greatest amount of damage dealt by a source to a permanent or player this turn. So essentially say that Feather hits someone for 10 damage. We can cast this, target Feather with 1 point of damage, and use the other 9 on our opponent's creatures. That way, not only do we get rid of some of our opponent's creatures, but we also get this spell back. And then we're going to be running Slaughter the Strong, which says each player chooses any number of creatures they control, total power of 4 or less, and then sacrifices all other creatures they control. Luckily for us, Feather only has 3 power, so she's going to survive this, but our opponent's creatures might not be so lucky. Another spell that can really demolish our opponent's boards is Divine Reckoning. It says each player chooses a creature they control, destroy the rest. Although we won't actually get this back because we don't target Feather, we can flash it back for 5 white. Next up is Tragic Arrogance, which says for each player you choose from among the permanents, that player controls an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. Then that player sacrifices all other non-land permanents they control. This spell can be absolutely backbreaking to our opponents. We basically won't be losing anything, and our opponents are going to be losing a ton. And the best part is we get to make the decision on what they lose. And finally, we're running Urza's Ruinous Blast, which is a legendary sorcery, so we have to have Feather out in order to cast it. It says exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. This deck basically doesn't run any non-land permanents other than some artifacts, so we're going to be fine. But our opponents are going to lose quite a bit from this. Feather's an extremely unique commander and perhaps the most powerful Boros commander ever made. But now that we've gone through the cards that help us win with this deck, let's go through the cards that help make it happen. It's time to go on to the mana base. First up, we're going to be running Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap and sacrifice to search our library for a basic land and put into play tapped. Next up is Aether Hub, which taps for colorless, or we can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool once. And then we're running Boros Guildgate, Stone Quarry, Ancient Amphitheater, Windscarred Crag, Needle Spires, and Temple of Triumph, each of which enters the battlefield tapped and adds either red or white to our mana pool. On top of that, Windscarred Crag is going to gain us 1 life when it comes into play. If we pay for it, we can turn Needle Spires into a creature, but we're usually not going to do that. And then Temple of Triumph lets us scry 1 when it comes into play. Next up is Battlefield Forge, which can tap for colorless or it can tap for either our colors, but it deals 1 damage to us. And then Boros Garrison enters the battlefield tapped and makes us return a land back to our hand. It does have the upside though of tapping for both of our colors. Next up we're running Vivid Meadow and Vivid Crag, each of which enters the battlefield tapped with 2 charge counters on them. Each of them can either tap for 1 of our colors, or we can tap and remove a charge counter from them to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. And finally we're going to be running 21 basic lands, 15 of those will be a plains and 6 will be a mountain. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCGPLAYER optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. The average Feather EDH rec deck is going to set you back $197.41, so let's see if we compare to that. Our deck is going to be much more affordable, coming in at just $24.91. And just a quick reminder that our deck cost actually doesn't include our commander because it is a commander excluded episode. Again, Commander's Quarters decks are built to be tuned and focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades that you can add into the deck and what I would take out for those cards too. Just a quick disclaimer before we get into this, these reasonable upgrades are going to be completely based off of my own perspective. When you're making choices on how to adjust your deck, you're taking your own playstyle and meta into account. So make sure that you factor that in when it comes to making your own decisions on what to swap in and what to swap out. Now that we're on the same page, let's go through how I personally would upgrade the deck. First up, let's add in Command Tower, which comes in at $2.22. It's a land that can tap to add 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. To put this in, we're going to be taking out a plains. Fixing our mana early is extremely important in this deck. Command Tower is one of the best commander lands out there, so this is a very easy swap for us. And then let's upgrade this deck by adding in Cold Steel Heart, which comes in at $2.94. It's an artifact that costs 2 and it enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, we get to choose a color, and then we can tap to add 1 mana of the chosen color. To put this in, we're going to take out Pillar of Origins. Cold Steel Heart is a fantastic mana rock that helps us fix our mana and ramps us early. Pillar of Origins helps us do the same, but only for casting Feather. This is an easy upgrade to make that helps us cast our spells quicker. Next up, let's add in Crimson Wisp, which comes in at $3.42. It's an instant that costs a red, and it says target creature becomes red and gains haste until end of turn, draw a card. To put this in, let's take out Stun. This is a pretty obvious upgrade for us. Both of these draw a card, but Crimson Wisp not only costs less, but it also gives haste. In this deck, our spells need to be as efficient as they possibly can. The more efficient our spells are, the more that we can cast in a turn, and the more value that we can get from them. And then let's upgrade this deck by adding in Balduvian Rage, which comes in at $5.26. It's an instant that costs an X and a red, and it says target attacking creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn. And draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. To put this in, we're going to be taking out Accelerate. Again, this is just another strict upgrade for the deck. Balduvian Rage can be a cheap draw spell for us, but we can also make it into a pump spell if we want to. Accelerate's not a bad card, but again, we want as many cards at 1 mana as we can. Next up, let's add in Chandra's Ignition, which comes in at $3.59. It's a sorcery that costs 3 red, and it says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. To put this in, we're going to be taking out Divine Reckoning. This is a fantastic wrath for this deck because it targets. With just one pump spell in this, we can pretty much wipe out all of our opponent's creatures. On top of that, our opponents are going to take some damage too, so we can finish off any opponents that are low. And because it targets Feather, we get it back. Divine Reckoning is a decent wrath, but it's not nearly as good in this deck. Finally, let's add in Seize the Day, which comes in at $3.76. It's a sorcery that costs 3 and a red, and it says untap target creature. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. It also has flashback for 2 and a red. To put this in, we're going to take out Moment of Heroism. Seize the Day is an extremely impactful card in this deck. Since we get it back from targeting Feather, we basically can get additional combat steps for the rest of the game once we have it. And this, paired with an effect like Double Strike, can be very deadly for multiple opponents. Moment of Heroism is a good card, but it's not nearly as impactful. It might help us live longer, but Seize the Day helps us close out our games quicker. And with that, this show is coming to a close, but I really just want to hear about what you guys think about this episode, so why don't you let me know in the comments below. When you're buying a deck or just individual cards, make sure to use our link in the description. Not only will you be getting great prices on TCGPLAYER, but you're also going to be supporting this show because they sponsor us. And make sure that you follow us on social media so you can get some early hints on who the next commander just might be. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, check out some of our other episodes on budget deck techs, Quest for Quarters episodes, Commander topics, and Creators Quarters. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.